So today's Daf Yomi for Shabbos 5783 is Nedarim Nun Gimel. Nedarim 53 says the Mishnah on the top of Nun Gimel Amid Aleph. I know there minat tamarim. Somebody takes a vow against eating dates. I know there minat tamarim mutar bidvash tamarim. Then you're allowed to eat something that's called date honey. That we're going to associate the vow against dates specifically with dates, but not with something that has the name date in it, even though it's a derivative of the date, i.e. the date honey. And this is, we say with Nedarim, we follow the way people speak. And if somebody, you think, I take a vow against dates, the understanding is that you're vowing against dates, not against date honey. But if you say sitvanios are the grapes that grow in the winter that are not as desirable, then mutar b'chomet sitvanius. You're also, if you take a vow against sitvanius, you're allowed to have the vinegar that comes from these winter grapes. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda ben Meseira disagrees. He says, Omer kol sheshem toldaso kruya alav, anything which still has its original name, kol sheshem toldaso kruya alav, anything that still has its original name, v'noder imenu, and he takes a vow from it, then we're going to say also. So anything like in this case, if he takes a vow against dates and then he has date honey, since it still has initial dates on it, he's going to be prohibited in the date honey. So asur b'yotzei, you're prohibited in the thing that comes out of it. The Tanakama had said that you were permitted, and now the Gemara concludes with the third position, and the Chachamim matirin. The Chachamim also allowed. So the Gemara is going to have to explain what's the difference between the Tanakama and the Chachamim. So the Gemara asked that question right away. Chachamim hainu Tanakama. Both of them allow, if you take a vow against dates, both seem to allow, and you take a vow against winter grapes, both seem to allow the date honey and the winter grape vinegar. So what's the difference between the Tanakama and the Chachamim? So the Gemara is going to tell us that there's actually a distinction. Ika b'nayu hadetanya. The following position is the distinction between them. It's the following brisa. Klal Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. The Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar taught a principle. Kol shedarko lachol. Anything which you typically eat. V'derach hayotze mimenu lachol. So anything which you typically eat, and typically people will eat that which comes out of it. So people eat the thing itself, i.e. in this case, the dates, and also the date honey, which comes out of it. Could go in tamarim, like dates, udavash tvarim, and date honey. Nadar bro, if you take the vow against the dates, also you're also prohibited in the date honey. So that seems to be like Rabbi Yehuda ben Meseira. But now here is where Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar introduces a new concept. But no, they're miyotzi mimenu. But if you take a vow against just the thing that comes out of it, i.e., in this case, the date honey, asur bo, you're also prohibited against the dates. But kol she'ein darko lachol, but anything which you don't typically eat, i.e., in this case, the winter grapes, v'derech hayotzi mimenu lachol, and typically the things that come out of it you do eat. Nadar bo ein asur ela b'yotzi mimenu. If you take a vow against it, like let's say you take a vow against the winter grapes, you're only prohibited in the winter grape vinegar. Because by vowing against winter grapes, you're really only prohibiting the thing that comes out of it. In this case, the winter vinegar, the winter grapes vinegar. So the Chachamim are saying, so now we have a three-way machlokas. According to this approach, when it comes to winter grapes, the Tanakama says if you vow against the winter grapes, you're prohibited in the winter grapes, but you're permitted in the winter grape vinegar. Rabbi Yehuda ben Meseira says you're prohibited in the winter grapes and winter grape vinegar. And the Chachamim say you're permitted in the winter grapes, but you're prohibited in the winter grape vinegar. Comes up the next Mishnah. If you take a vow against wine, mutar b'yayin tapuchim, you're allowed to have fermented apples. Min hashemen, if you take a vow against oil, mutter b'shemen shumshemen. If you take a vow that you're not going to have any benefit from oil, you're allowed to benefit from sesame oil. Minadvash, if you take a vow against honey, mutter b'dvash tamarim. You're allowed to have date honey. Menachometz, if you take a vow against vinegar, mutter b'chometz advanias. You're allowed to have winter grape vinegar. Minakarishin, if you take a vow against leeks, presumably large leeks, mutter b'kaputos, you're allowed to benefit from small leeks. Menayerek, if you take a vow against vegetables, and presumably this is the vegetables that grow in your garden, mutter b'yirakos asadeh, then you're allowed to have the vegetables that grow wild. Because when you say yerek, it really only implies the yerek of your garden. The yerek of your garden. So, 1 second. Okay, so, and the Mishnah concludes, Shehu Shem Levi, because this Yerakos of the field, that's just an accompanying name, and it's not going to be included in the category of Yerek, if it says Yerek HaSadeh. So says the Gemara's discussion of this is as follows. Gemara's discussion of this is Tanya, Noder min Hashem and Be'eretz Israel. Let's say somebody takes a vow against oil in the land of Israel. Mutter b'shem and shumshemen. Oil in the land of Israel means olive oil, so you're allowed to have sesame oil. You're also b'shem and zayis, but you're not going to be allowed to have olive oil. But if you take this vow in Babylon, also b'shem and shumshemen, you're allowed to have if you take this vow in Babylon, you're prohibited to have sesame oil, but you're allowed to have shemen zayis. But you're allowed to have olive oil. It depends where you are. In Eretz Yisrael, oil means olive oil, and in Babylon, it means sesame oil, not olive oil. Makom shemastapkin mizem, a place where you typically eat both types of oil. Aser b'zeh b'zeh. Then when you take the vow, you're prohibited in both. So the Gemara says, well, pshita, isn't that obvious? The Gemara says, no, it's not obvious. So we need this teaching to teach us about a situation, deruba minchad mistapkin, where most of the people get supported by one of them. Ma'odedema, you might have said, ezo basaruba. You might have said, where most of the people get supported by one of these oils. So you might have said, well, clearly his implication of it was to follow the one with the most of the people. Kamash B'lan, no, we don't say that. Safek isura l'chumra. If there's a doubt about a prohibition, then we're going to be strict. And so then, since there's a minority of the people who are supported by who when they have oil, they use this type of oil. So therefore, we have to be concerned with those type of people. And so therefore, that was the intent. When it says suffix, there are different types of the word suffix. This is not a suffix. This is not a doubt where sometimes you say, well, I don't know if the milk fell into the chicken. That's not what we're saying here. We're saying there's a majority of the people who have this type of oil and lesser people have this type of oil. But still, since there are some people who have this lesser type of oil, we have to be concerned for that possibility. But the facts in the case are not in doubt here at all. Okay, so I know they're in a yerek. Somebody takes a vow that they're not going to eat yerek, that's vegetables. Now, b'shar shenei shavua, all the other years of the sabbatical year cycle, not the 7th year, but the other 6 years, also b'yerakos agina. If you take a vow against a yerek, against vegetables, then the presumption is for the first 6 years of the sabbatical year cycle, that you're prohibiting the vegetables that grow in your garden, but you're allowed to eat the vegetables that grow in the field. But in the sabbatical year, you're prohibited to have the vegetables of the field, and you're allowed to have the vegetables of the garden, because in the sabbatical year, you typically speaking, we're going to say that you're going to eat the ownerless vegetables and not the vegetables that grow in your garden. As the Ran says, if you make the vow in the sabbatical year, it can't say that your intent was for the yerek of your garden. We don't sow or plant in the sabbatical year. So it's clear that he intended for the vegetables that are growing on their own. Amar Rabbi Avo Mishum Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel. So Rabbi Avo says in the name of Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel, Whoa, Shanu El b'makom she'im avin yerek b'chutz la'aretz. When do we say that in the sabbatical year you're allowed to have the vegetables of the garden? Then the Yerakos Agina, the domesticated vegetables, so to speak, only when they don't bring the vegetables, a place where they don't bring vegetables to eat from outside the land of Israel. Because since they don't bring him, certainly that wasn't his intent. That's why you could have the vegetables of the garden. But in the place where they bring the vegetables, it's going to be prohibited also, even to those Yerakos of the garden. Since people typically eat the vegetables of the field and vegetables of the garden, so for sure he had both things in mind. Meaning to say, now he's going to be prohibited in both, not just one. So the Gemara says, Kitanai. This is according to the position, the approach that says you don't bring vegetables, and according to him, you're going to allow the Yerakos of the garden, but this is actually a dispute amongst the Tanaim. We learned that Brisa, aim of being Yerak min chutz la'aretz. You're not allowed to bring vegetables from outside the land of Israel to the land of Israel, whereas Rabbi Chanina on the sabbatical year. And we'll see why in a moment. Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel says, he says you're allowed to bring the vegetables from outside the land of Israel to the land of Israel. My time of the man the Amar Amavin. What's the reasoning for the one who says you don't bring it? Why can't you bring vegetables? Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah Mishum Gush. Gush means a clump. So the Ran explains, or actually, I was reading first, but the Ran explains, we're afraid to bring the vegetables because we're concerned that there's some earth that's attached to it. And the gush, the earth of the lands of the world, of the nations of the world, is considered to be tamei, like it says in Tractate Shabbos. Why is it tamei? Presumably because they don't keep track of where the dead bodies are buried. Okay, now we're up to the last Mishnah of this chapter. If a person takes a vow and says he's not going to benefit from the min hakruv, from cabbage, aser be-ispargus, then he's going to be prohibited in ispargus. And what's ispargus? This is a specific type of cabbage because that's included within the category of cabbage. I know it sounds like asparagus, but they're saying it's a specific type of cabbage. The Meiri and the Rambam, they say it differently. They say asparagus refers to the water that they soak the cabbage in. So anyway, if you take a vow against the cabbage, you're prohibiting the asparagus. Asparagus, but if you take a vow against the asparagus, mutar bikruv, you're allowed to have the cabbage. Because the cabbage is this is like if you take a vow against whey, you're allowed to have the milk. Mina grisin, if you take a vow against these ground up grains, the ground up beans, also b'mikbah. Then you're prohibited in mikbah. It's like a porridge, because the people they call a tav shel mikbah shel grisim. So therefore, it's going to be prohibited. Rabbi Yossi allows it because in his place where he was from, they didn't use that terminology. Mina mikbah, but if you just say not ba mikbah, but mina mikbah, mutar b'grisin, then you're allowed to have these raw grisin because they're not included in this porridge. Let's say you say mina mikbah, which is this porridge, a thick porridge, asur b'shum. You're prohibited to have garlic because mikbah really refers to anything that is thick. And the way they used to eat the garlic was they would mix it with a little bit of water and mix it until it's congealed. Rabbi Yossi allows somebody who takes a vow from mikveh to eat the garlic. Somebody who takes a vow minashum. Somebody takes a vow from garlic mutar b'mikveh. He's allowed to have the more general category of the mikveh. Minadashim. Let's say you take a vow from lentils. Also ba'ashishim. Then you know what have the ashishim. Shishim is a type of lentils mixed with flour and honey. Rabbi Yossi Ma'atir. Rabbi Yossi allows you to have. Rabbi Yossi allows somebody who takes a vow from the Adashim to eat the Ashishim. Somebody takes a vow not to benefit from the Ashishim, Mutar Ba'adashim. He's allowed to have the lentils because, again, a more specific category. Chita chitin she'ini tohem. Let's say a person takes a vow, he's not going to eat wheat or pieces of wheat. Aser ba'en, bein kemach, bein apas. If a person takes a vow against wheat or chitin laites, he's not allowed to eat the wheat, whether it's in the flour form or whether it's baked into bread. Because chitim implies raw before they're baked, and chita implies even baked. Gris, and shani toim. Let's say he takes a vow against gris or grisin. Then we're going to say these are like grits. Asur ba'en bein chayim bein bushan. You're going to be prohibited to eat these grits, whether they are raw or cooked, because grisim implies raw grits. Because grisim implies raw and gris implies cooked. Rabbi Yehuda Omer. Konim grease or chita shanitoim. Rabbi Yehuda says a person takes a vow against grease or wheat, they're not going to taste it. Mutar lakostayim. He's allowed to chew them while they're raw, because the typical practice was not to chew one wheat berry by itself, but only many berries together. But he's prohibited to eat bread, because bread after it's baked is called chita in the singular, because it becomes one entity. So it says the Gemara Tanya, Reb Shimon Gamliel Omer, chita shani tohem. The person takes a vow that he's not going to taste a thing of basically a piece of wheat. Also, afros. You're not allowed to bake. You're not allowed to bake the bread, because after it's baked, it becomes one entity, and so therefore it's one entity. It's prohibited. The mutar akos, but you're allowed to chew it, because you typically don't eat one wheat berry at it's by itself. But if you say chitim shani tohem, also akos and mutar afos. If you say in the plural, then you're not allowed to chew it, because you chew several berries together, but you're allowed to bake it, because then it's only one. Chita chitin shani tohem. If you say chita and chitim, also by ben lakus ben afos, then you're not allowed to chew it or to eat it, because they include both. Gris shani tohem. If you say I'm not going to eat any grits, also a vashel, you're not going to be allowed to taste cooked grits. Mutar lakos, but you're allowed to chew them. Grisin shani tohem. Let's say you say I'm not going to eat multiple grisim. Also lakos, you're prohibited to chew. Umutar vashel, you're allowed to cook them. You're allowed to cook them. Let's say grisin shani tohem. Also ben vashel ben lakus. Then it's prohibited to cook and to chew it. So, okay, so this is Hadron al Chanodim and Mavushal. We will return to you. I know there Min Mavushal, the 6th chapter of the Safat Nedarim. Everybody should have a good Shabbos. Take care.
Shabbos.